בבקשה להמשיך מהאוזן.
Please continue, Mr. Hausner.
והרי מספר פרטים אישיים על אייכמן.
Now for a few personal details concerning the accused.
הוא נולד ב-19 למרץ
He was born on March
1906
the 19th,
בזולינגן,
1906 in Solingen,
ועבר בילדותו עם
and as a
הוריו
child moved
ללינץ
with his
שבאוסטריה.
parents to Linz in Austria.
לאחר שסיים לימודיו
After
בבית ספר
graduating
עממי,
from primary school,
למד בבית ספר
he
תיכון
studied
ובבית
at a
ספר
secondary
טכני.
school and a technical college.
כבר
As
ב-1927
early as 1927,
נמצא אותו צועד
we
בשורת
find him
ארגון
marching
לוחמי
in
החזית
the ranks of the
הגרמנית
German
אוסטרית,
Austrian front fighters,
והחל
and in 1932
מ-1932
he became a member of the Nazi
ב-SS.
party and the SS.
השושבין שלו
He was
לכניסה
introduced
לארגון
into
זה
the party by
היה
his
ידידו
boyhood
מנוער,
friend,
ואחר כך
later
מפקדו
his chief,
ארנסט קלטנברונר, איש הדמים,
the blood-stained Ernst
שבית הדין הצבאי
Kaltenbrunner,
הבינלאומי אמר
whom
עליו
the International
כי
Military
היה לו
Tribunal
פיקוח על
stigmatized
כל פעולות
as the
הפשע
effective supervisor
של
and
משרד
commander
הביטחון הראשי של
over
הרייך.
all the criminal activities of the RSHA.
כניסתו של אייכמן
Of course,
ל-SS
Eichmann joined the
והצטרפותו
ranks of the
לשורותיו
SS
הייתה
and
כמובן
remained
על
in the
פי רצונו.
organization of his own free will.
גם הישארותו
Like
בהם
his master Hitler,
מרצונו החופשי
he
בה.
left Austria and settled in Germany.
כרבו היטלר עזב אף הוא את אוסטריה
Hitler
ועבר לרייך.
did so
היטלר עשה כן
in order
כי לא
to
רצה לשרת
evade
בצבא
military
האוסטרי.
service in the Austrian army.
אייכמן
Eichmann,
קסם לו כוחו
because he
העולה
was attracted
של
by the
הנציונל
rising power of
סוציאליזם
National
בגרמניה.
Socialism in Germany.
ב-1933 נמצא אותו
1933, we
מקבל
find
לימוד
him
צבאי
getting his
בשורות
military
ה-SS
training in the
בגרמניה,
SS camp
במחנה לשפלד
at
ואחר כך
Lechfeld
בפסאו.
and later at Passau.
ב-1934 נפגוש אותו
We meet him
כבר בדרגת
with the rank
אונטרשארפירר
of
במחנה דכאו.
Unterscharführer in the concentration camp
זה
of
בית
Dachau,
הספר לכל
which
אנשי
served as a
ה-SS
school for all
שסגולותיהם
promising
הבטיחו
SS
טובות.
men.
מפקדו הראשון
The first
של
commander of
מחנה
this
זה,
camp,
תיאודור אייקה,
Theodor
קבע שם
Eicke,
מלכתחילה את
laid down at the
העקרונות, אני
outset
מצטט.
this principle.
סובלנות פירושה
Tolerance
חולשה.
means weakness.
מתוך הכרה
Knowing
זו
this,
יש לפעול
one
ללא
must act
התחשבות,
without mercy when the
שהדבר
interests of the
נראה לנחוץ
homeland
למען המולדת.
appear to demand it.
למסיתים
As for
הפוליטיים
political agitators and
והאינטלקטואליים,
intellectuals
וחשוב מאיזה
of
צד הם
whatever
באים,
complexion,
יש
they
לומר
must
כי
be
ייזהרו,
told, beware,
אחרת ייתפסו
or you will be
בגרונם
grabbed by the throats
ויובאו לידי השתקה.
and silenced.
עד כאן.
Unquote.
בדכאו עברו את
was
כל
the
המצרף
refining
של מעשי
crucible,
אלימות וזוועות,
the school of
רבי
violence and
הטבחים
horrors
של הנאצים
to
לעתיד.
which future Nazi leaders
שם
had
לימדו
to
את
pass.
תורת השנאה,
It was there that they were taught the
הכריחו
doctrine of
לאסירים
hate,
ולהוציאם
were
להורג.
compelled to beat prisoners and put them to death.
מצויד בניסיון זה
Armed
עבר
with this
אדולף אייכמן
experience,
בספטמבר
Adolf Eichmann went over in
1934
September
לשרת
1934
ב-SD,
to serve in the
כעת
SD,
כבר בדרגת סמל.
already now a Scharführer.
שנה לאחר מכן נמצא אותו
A year
במחלקה
later we
היהודית
find
של
him in the
ה-SD,
Jewish section of the SD,
שעבדה בשיתוף פעולה הדוק
which
עם
worked in
המחלקה
close
היהודית
cooperation
במשטרה
with the Jewish
החשאית
section of the
הממלכתית,
state secret
הגסטאפו.
police, the Gestapo.
כבר בשנים הראשונות
During
של
the early years
פעולתו,
of his work
הוא
there,
פגש שם אחדים מאלה
he met a
שיהיו
number
אחר
of
כך
those who were
מעוזריו
later to be
הנאמנים.
among his faithful
סליצני,
assistants, Rislitseni,
דנקר,
Danneker,
האחים גינטר
the brothers
ואלויס
Günther
ברונר.
and Alois Brunner.
בשירותו זה הוא עסק בעיקר
Eichmann's main
בשטח
employment at
הגיון.
this stage was in
אייכמן
the field
נשלח
of
למזרח
intelligence.
הקרוב
He was sent to the Near
והגיש
East
דוח מפורט על
and presented
נסיעתו,
a detailed report of his
ואילו
trip,
ויסליצני נשלח
while
לקונגרס
Vislitseni was sent
הציוני
to the 20th
ה-20
Zionist Congress
לעקוב אחרי
to
דיוניו.
follow its debates.
ב-SD הוסיף אייכמן
Eichmann
לעלות
continued to
בדרגה.
rise in the ranks of the SD
והגיע
and was
לקצונה
commissioned in
ב-1937.
1937.
אז נפגוש אותו
During this period, we shall meet
בלוויית
him in the
שושבינו
company of
השני,
his second sponsor,
יוליוס
the
שטריישר
infamous
הידוע
Julius
לשמצה,
Streicher,
שבית הדין
who was
הצבאי
branded by the
הבינלאומי
International
הוקיעו
Military Tribunal,
כמסית
the
ומשסה
voice of the
לרצח
world's conscience,
ולהשמדה.
as an inciter and instigator of murder and
שטריישר
extermination.
ועוזריו קרבו את אייכמן,
Streicher and his subordinates
והביאו
befriended
לכנס
Eichmann and
המפלגה
brought him to the
הנאצית
Congress of the
בנירנברג
National
בשנת
Socialist Party in
1937.
Nuremberg in 1937.
שם
There
הופגש
he
עם
met
כל
all
אלה
those from
מבני
abroad
חוץ
who were
לארץ,
anxious for a Nazi
המייחלים
victory,
לניצחון הנאצים,
and there he
ושם
made
קשר
contact
קשרים
with
עם
the
ראשי
leaders
התעמולה
of the
האנטישמית.
anti-Semitic agitation.
עם כיבוש אוסטריה
With the
במרץ
conquest of Austria in March
1938
1938,
נשלח אייכמן
Eichmann was sent
בחזרה
back to the country
לארץ
in
בה
which he
גדל.
had grown to manhood.
אז היה כבר
By this
מקובל
time he was already
כמומחה
known as an
בעל
expert
ניסיון מעשי
with practical
בעניינים
experience
יהודיים.
in Jewish affairs.
וינה הייתה
Vienna was
בית
his training
ספרו
ground for
העצמאי הראשון
independent
של
work.
אדולף אייכמן.
where he first
בו פעל
began to assume
לראשונה
responsibility
כאחראי
as
ומארגן.
an organizer.
אז התרכזה
At that
מדיניות
time,
הנאצים
Nazi policy
בכפיית
concentrated on
היהודים
compelling
להגירה,
Jews to emigrate.
ואייכמן התמסר
Eichmann devoted
למשימה זו
himself to
בלב
furthering this
הנפש,
policy with great
עד
zeal,
שכעבור זמן קצר הועלה פועלו
so that
בפני
after a
שרי
short
הרייך
while his work was
כאות
brought to the
ומופת
notice
לדרך
of the
בה
ministers of the
ניתן
Reich
לסלק יהודים.
as the model to follow
בווינה אורגן
in the
הדבר
liquidation of the Jews.
בשיטת הסרט הנע.
In Vienna, this process was organized on the assembly line
נכנס
principle.
אדם למשרד,
A man came into the office,
והוא
still
עוד
a
אזרח,
citizen,
בעל
with
בעמד,
a status in
בעל
society,
משרה,
a job,
מקום
a
מגורים
home,
ורכוש,
and property.
ולאחר שעבר את כל
Being
שלבי
thoroughly
הטיפול,
processed,
יצא
he
מהגר,
came out an immigrant,
שרכושו
his
נלקח,
property gone,
בחלקו הופקע,
confiscated,
בחלקו הושקע לפי
and in
פקודת
part
השלטון
invested by government
במטבע
order in
חסום
frozen
שערכו מועט,
currency of little value.
כשדירתו כבר
His
רשומה
apartment
להפקעה,
registered for confiscation,
כשאין לו עוד מקום עבודה,
no longer employed,
כשבניו אינם עוד
his
תלמידים בבתי
children no
ספר,
longer pupils in school.
וכל מה שבידו
The
הרי
only
היא
thing in his
תעודת מסע,
possession, a
עם
travel
הסימון
certificate
יהודי,
marked
המקנה
Jew,
לו זכות לצאת
which
את
granted
אוסטריה
him
עד תאריך
permission
מסוים,
to leave Austria
שלא
by
על
a
מנת
certain
לחזור.
date, never to return.
הלחץ על הגירת יהודים
The
נמשך
pressure for
בכל
Jewish
הדרכים.
immigration continued by all
תוך
possible
24
means.
שעות נדרשו
Foreign and
נתיני
stateless
החוץ
Jews were
וחסרי
ordered to leave the
המתינות לעזוב
country
את
within
המדינה.
24 hours.
יהודים
Jews
מערי
from the
השדה
provinces
הובאו
were brought to Vienna
לווינה
in a
מחוסרי
destitute
כל,
condition.
ויהודי אותה
The
עיר
Jews of the
חויבו
capital were
לשכנם
ordered to house and
בבתיהם
look after them
ולדאוג
until the
להם עד
time for their
להגירתם.
departure.
המסרבים נאסרו,
Those who refused were arrested.
ובינתיים
In the
הוחרמו בתי
meantime,
חולים,
Jewish
בתי ספר
hospitals, schools,
ובתי
and
הבראה.
convalescent homes were taken over.
לא ייפלא
It
כי
is no
שליחי
wonder then
יהדות
that the
ברלין
representatives of Berlin
שהצטרכו
Jewry, who
לבוא
were ordered to
לווינה,
come to Vienna to
לחזות
witness
בפלאי
Eichmann's
הישגיו של
remarkable
אייכמן
achievements and
כדי
learn their
ללמוד לקח
lesson,
ממנו לראות
stood
וכן לעשות,
awe-stricken at this mass
עמדו מוכי
production
תדהמה
immigration.
מפני תעשיית הגירה זו. החל מראשית 1939
From early
הועתקה
1939,
שיטת אייכמן
Eichmann's system
להגירת
of
גירוש
Jewish
יהודית
expulsion by
גם
immigration
למשרד הרשות
was
המרכזית של
copied by the
גרמניה
Office of the
להגירת
Central
יהודים
German
שהוקמה
Authority for Jewish
בברלין
Immigration set up in Berlin,
וגם למשרד שהוקם
as well as
בפראג
by a similar
עם
office
כניסת
created
הגרמנים
in
לשם.
Prague after the German invasion.
הזכרתי כבר
As I have
כי
already
בספטמבר
mentioned, in
39
September
איחד
1939,
הימלר
Himmler
משטרת
unified the
הביטחון
National Security
הממלכתית
Police,
ציפו
SIPO,
שירותי המודיעין
Sicherheitspolizei,
המפלגתי
and the
SD.
Party Intelligence Service SD.
סמוך לזמן זה
It was around this time
חזר
that
אף
the accused
הנאשם לברלין
returned to Berlin
ונתמנה
and
לראש
was
הרשות
appointed chief of the
המרכזית
Central
להגירת
Authority for
יהודים,
Jewish Immigration,
תפקיד של ההלכה
post officially
מילאו
occupied
היידריש,
by Heydrich,
אף שהנאשם
though the
פעל בו
accused had
כבר.
already been doing the actual work previously.
נביא ראיות על
We shall
שיטות
bring
עבודתו
evidence of
בווינה
Eichmann's
ובפראג,
methods of work in Vienna and in
על
Prague.
טיפולו ודיבורו עם
This will show how he
יהודים
treated and
לפי
spoke with
מיטב
Jews in the best
מסורת
tradition of
ההפכנות
Nazi
הנאצית.
duplicity.
היו אלה
There was
דיכוי,
oppression,
טרור
terror, and
והפחדה,
intimidation.
ביחד עם
And at the
העמדת
same time,
פנים
the deliberate
ויצירת רושם
cultivation of the
במתכוון
impression that
שהשד
perhaps
אולי
the
אינו
devil
רע,
is not so bad after all.
שאפשר אולי
That
איכשהו
perhaps it might be
להסתדר
possible
איתו,
somehow to come to
לשאת
terms with
ולתת
him,
איתו,
to conduct
ואפילו
negotiations,
לשמוע לעתים נימה
and even at
מנומסת.
times to detect in his voice a note of politeness.
מצד אחד,
On the one hand,
סטירת לחי
a
לדוקטור
slap in the face
לבנהרץ,
for Dr.
מראשי
Löwenherz, one
קהילת
of the
וינה
leaders of the Vienna
בפגישתם
Jewish
הראשונה,
community at their first meeting,
גערת עריצים
arrogant
כלפי
invective of
שטל,
Stahl,
מראשי
head of the
קהילת
Berlin
ברלין
community in 1939, in
ב-1939,
the style of,
בנוסח אלוף
you
שכמוך,
wretch,
שק צואה
you
שכמוך,
sack of dung,
כבר מזמן לא
it's a
ישבת
long time
במחנה
since you were in a
ריכוז.
concentration camp. Unquote.
דיבורו כלפי סגן היהודים שבשטין
Or
בברטיסלבה,
Shebestin, the venerable
שהעז
leader of
להציע לו
Bratislavan
סיגריה,
Jewry, who had dared to offer him
והוא
a
שאל,
cigarette, a yell,
וג מידם צויק,
Weg mit dem
הלאה עם
Teufel,
החפץ הזה.
take the thing away.
כל אלה
All this,
בצדם
side by
של
side with
העמדת
the
פנים,
hypocritical pretense.
כי הוא מתעניין
He
בבעיות
was interested
יהודיות,
in Jewish problems and
והיענותו
would give a
למשאלות
favorable
מסוימות
response to certain
על פי רוב
requests,
בעניינים של מוות.
usually concerning trivial matters.
עדיין דימו עסקנים יהודים,
Some Jewish leaders still thought it necessary to make some attempt at negotiating with him.
מה גם
And
שבעצם
indeed,
לא הייתה
there was
כל
no
דרך.
other way,
הוא הפך
for he had
לאדון
become the
החיים
master
והמוות
of life
לגבי
and death for
היהודים.
the Jews.
עוד רחוקה הדרך
When the
למשרפות
road was still
אושוויץ
long to the furnaces of Auschwitz
ולדיכוי
and the brutal
הברוטלי של
suppression of
יהדות
Hungarian
הונגריה,
Jewry,
כשאדולף אייכמן זה
we find this Adolf
מעז לומר
Eichmann daring to use to
לברון
Baron von Freudiger,
מאציליה
a man of rare
ומנהיגיה של
distinction
יהדות
and leader of
בודפסט,
Budapest Jewry,
שבא
who had
להתחנן
come
על
to plead
נפש
for Jewish
היהודים,
lives,
Ich werde mit
the
ihnen
insulting
Schlitten fahren.
expression, ich werde mit ihnen Schlitten
אני
fahren,
אעשה ממך עגלת
I'll ride on
חול.
you like a sledge.
אך אייכמן כבר נמצא
Eichmann was well
בדרך
on the way to
לייעודו.
his goal.
הוא
He was
המפקד,
in fact the Lord
המוציא
and master of
והמביא,
the Jews,
למעשה אדונם
gave
של
them
היהודים
orders
ושליט גורלם,
and determined their destiny.
כפי
It
שיתברר
will be
לכם
clear from
מכל
all the
הדינים
documents of the
וחשבונות
Jewish
של
communities in
קהילות
Vienna and
וינה ופראג
Prague
שנגיש
that
לכם.
will be presented to the court.
בינתיים זיכתה
Meanwhile,
אותו
his success in
הצלחתו
persecuting
ברדיפת
the Jews
היהודים
had brought him
ביתר סמכויות
promotion
ובעלייה בדרגה.
and greater authority.
בסוף
At the end of
1939
1939,
נפגוש את אייכמן
we find
בברלין.
Eichmann in Berlin.
עתה הוא מזמין כבר
Now
את
he
נציגי
summons the
קהילת וינה
representatives
אליו,
of the Vienna community
מצווה להם
to
לדווח
report to
לו על
him on the
ההתקדמות
progress
של
of Jewish
ההגירה,
immigration
לקבל
and
שאר
receive other
הוראותיו
instructions
בענייני
concerning
הקהילה.
the community's affairs.
מעתה כך הודיע להם,
Henceforth he notifies them
יחלק זמנו
he
בין
will be dividing
ברלין,
his
וינה,
time between
פראג
Berlin,
ופולין
Vienna,
הכבושה.
Prague and occupied Poland.
באותה
At
שעה,
the same time,
תודות
thanks
לניסיונו
to his
בעקירת
experience in
אוכלוסין,
uprooting populations,
נתמנה נוסף לתפקידיו
he is
בענייני
given the additional
היהודים,
responsibility of putting into
לאחראי
execution the
ומבצע
enormous
הגירוש העצום
expulsion
של
of the Jewish
אוכלוסייה
and Polish
יהודית ופולנית
populations from
מאזוריה
the western
המזרחיים
zones
של
of
פולין
Poland
שסופחו
annexed to the
לרייך,
Reich,
ובהם אזור
including the districts
הוורטגאו,
of Wartegau,
שלזיה
Upper
העילית,
Silesia,
שטח
and
הפרוזדור
the Polish
הפולני,
corridor with the
והעיר
city of
גדנסק.
Danzig.
הוא כבר אז
He
ראש
is already
מחלקה
chief of a department in the RSHA,
ב-RSHA, היא מחלקת
namely
4D4.
4D4.
באותה שעה
At that
טיפל
time he
גם
is also
בגירוש
occupied with
הטרגי
the
של
tragic
יהודים
expulsion
לאזור
of the
ניסקו.
Jews to the region of
בעניינים
Nisko.
אלה
In
עסק
1940
גם
he
בשנת
continued to deal with the
1940.
same matters.
במרץ
In March
1941 נפגוש את
1941, we meet
אייכמן
Eichmann
כראש
as head of the
המחלקה 4B4
4B4
בגסטאפו,
department of the Gestapo,
שעיסוקה בענייני
concerned
יהודים
with
וגירוש
Jewish affairs
אוכלוסייה,
and the expulsion of populations.
וכאן עתיד להיות
This was the
תפקידו
office he continued to
עד
hold
סופה
until
המר
the tragic end
של
of
יהדות אירופה.
European Jewry.
אך הוא היה
He was
גם
also
המיופה
Heydrich's
כוח
special
המיוחד של
plenipotentiary
היידריש
for the
לפתרון
solution
הסופי
of the
של
Jewish
בעיית
question.
היהודים. בתוקף
As a
צירוף
consequence
תפקידיו
of this
אלה,
combination of
ועל
functions
כך
to
עוד
which we shall
ידובר,
return,
היה
Eichmann
אייכמן
was the
אישית
official executor
למבצע
of
הרשמי
the
של תוכנית
extermination
ההשמדה,
program,
בעל
with
סמכויות
enormous
עצומות
authority in the
ברייך
German
הגרמני, שכלל
now
עתה גם את
included
אוסטריה
Austria and the
והפרוטקטורט ובכל
and all
ארצות.
the occupied countries.
הרי שהוא
In the
יפעל
Reich itself
באמצעות
he did his
מפקדות
work
המשטרה
by means of the
המחוזיות
local police
והנחתיות,
headquarters,
שטאפו לייטשטיין,
Stapo
שטאפו שטיין,
Leitstellen and Stapo
שבכל
Stellen,
אחת מהן
in each of which there
ממונה
was an
לענייני
officer for Jewish
יהודים
affairs,
המקבל
taking his
הוראות
orders
ישירות
direct from
מאדולף
Eichmann.
אייכמן. בארצות
In the
הכבושות,
conquered countries,
בצרפת,
France,
נורווגיה,
Norway,
בלגיה,
Belgium,
איטליה,
Italy,
הולנד,
Holland,
לוקסמבורג,
Luxembourg,
היו לו שליחים
he had special
מיוחדים עושי
envoys under his
דברו,
orders attached to
שפעלו
police
ליד פיקודי
headquarters
המשטרה והיו
who had
בעלי
the
סמכות
authority to deal
בענייני
with
יהודים.
Jewish matters.
בארצות
In
הגרועות,
the satellite
ברומניה,
countries such as
בולגריה,
Romania,
סלובקיה,
Bulgaria and Slovakia,
פעל
he
באמצעות
worked with
נציגים
special
מיוחדים
representatives
ליד
attached to
שגרירויות
the German
גרמניה באותן
delegations
ארצות, שדאגו
who
להפעיל את
procured the
שילוח
deportation of
היהודים
Jews with the aid of the
בעזרת
local
השלטונות
authorities,
המקומיים, על פי רוב
usually
על
misleading
ידי
them
הטעייתם
as to the
לגבי מטרת
destination
השילוח.
of the convoys.
בסרביה
In
פעל
Serbia,
אייכמן
Eichmann
על
used
ידי
special
שליחים,
envoys.
בקרואטיה
In Croatia, his
על ידי
representatives
נציגיו
of
על
the
יד
German
השגרירות
embassy.
הגרמנית, ליוון
To
הכבושה
occupy Greece and
ולדנמרק
Denmark,
שלח
he sent
יחידות
special units for the
מיוחדות
deportation
לשם
of
גירוש
Jews to
יהודים
the
למחנות
extermination
ההשמדה.
centers.
בשטח
In the
הגנרל
zone of the
גוברנמנט
Polish
הפולני
General Gouvernement,
פעל באמצעות מפקדי
his
משטרת
tools were
הביטחון
officers of the security police,
בשטחי הכיבוש במזרח,
and in the eastern
גם
occupied
באמצעות
territories he
מצוות
also used
המבצע
special mission groups,
האיינזאצגרופן.
Einsatzgruppen.
להונגריה
Eichmann
נשלח
himself in
בכבודו
person
ובעצמו
as the specialist in
כאומן
extermination was sent to
ההשמדה,
Hungary, where he
בראש
appeared
כל כת
leading a
לב,
band of Confederates
שביקשה
intent
תוך
on
זמן
completing their
קצר
mission
ככל
of
האפשר
butchery in the shortest time
לעשות את
possible.
מלאכת השילוח לפרק. באחת
In some, he reached out to every corner to carry out the final solution, using the methods he found most efficient, convenient and suitable to local conditions. With the satellite and conquered governments, he would sometimes use persuasion, sometimes threats, but he was always applying pressure, and always with one goal in mind: to get hold of the Jews and to send them to the camps in the east. He controlled the ghettos and extermination centers. His position in the RSHA was unique. He could pass over the heads of his superiors and deal directly with Himmler. His nominally humble status as the chief of a subordinate department did not reflect his powerful position. Through his concern with Jewish matters, he was granted comprehensive and potent authority, which brought him into contact with ministers of the Reich and heads of the conquered governments, with the elite of the German army and the top men of the Foreign Office. In all that pertained to Jewish affairs, he, Eijkman, operated with all the power and authority of Himmler and Heydrich behind him. We shall present documents proving that in Jewish matters, the RSHA, the Central Security Office of the German Reich, was in fact Adolf Eichmann. It does not surprise us, therefore, that on Jewish matters he gave orders to men of higher rank than his own. As early as 1939, he took part in a meeting to which the Minister Zeiss Inquart was also invited. His authority and power steadily increased, despite his inconspicuous nominal rank. As his assistant, Vyslitseny bore witness.
כי הסמכות בענייני יהודים עברה לראשי משטרת הביטחון וה-SD, ובכך גדל לאין שיעור כוחו של אייכמן ושל זה. הוא יכול היה על סמך פקודה זו, שלפי זיכרוני ניתנה בקיץ 41, לבטל ולהתגבר על כל שאר המיניסטרים ומוסדות השלטון. עד כאן. אנו נראה אותו מכין ומארגן את ועידת ואנזה המפורסמת, מתמנה למבצע החלטות הפתרון הסופי. אנו נראה את אייכמן פועל בשמו של הימלר ומורה על הוצאות להורג במחנות ריכוז. בעניינים יהודים העביר אייכמן הוראות גם לצבא הגרמני.
His powers grew and was solidly entrenched after the death of Heydrich. For half a year, until the appointment of Kaltenbrunner, the Rizha had no commander-in-chief. And during this period, the power of the department heads increased. And when the new chief turned out to be Kaltenbrunner, his boyhood friend, Eijkman came to enjoy a privileged position of great power. When I develop further the history of the Holocaust, I shall present to the court more details of the part Eijkman played in the work of extermination. At present, I shall only mention that in October 1941, the head of the personnel section of the SS recommended that he be promoted to the rank of Lieutenant Colonel, Obersturmbannführer, in these words: I am proposing this promotion on the ground of the exceptionally fine services rendered by Eijkman, who has already achieved excellent results in the de-Judaization of Austria in his capacity as head of the Central Authority for Jewish Immigration. Through Eichmann's work, enormous properties were secured for the German Reich. His work in the Protectorate, which was carried out with commendable initiative and the necessary firmness, was likewise distinguished. It should be added that Eijkman is an exemplary SS officer who was active for many years in Austria for the benefit of the National Socialist movement, losing his post there because of his political activities. this time, Aייכman is working on important problems of the evacuation and transfer of populations. In view of the importance of this work, I also regard Aייכman's promotion as desirable in the interests of the service. Unquote. It need hardly be added that this recommendation was accepted and Aייכman became an Obersturmbannführer. He received for his work a number of medals for distinguished service in the SS. In December 1944, he became head of Department IVA-4, which dealt with the Jews and with political problems relating to the Christian churches.
Adolf Aייכman
will tell you that he carried out the orders of his superiors. The conscience of the world, speaking with the voice of the International Military Tribunal, has declared that orders contrary to the principles of conscience and morality, orders that violate the essential imperatives on which human society is based, and negate the basic rules without which men cannot live together, such orders constitute no defense, legal or moral. Therefore, in the light of this ruling, our own law in Israel has denied the accused the right to submit such a defense. But that is by no means all. We shall prove to the court that he went far beyond his actual orders, that he took the initiative in extermination operations for which he had been given no orders whatsoever. Carried about only because of his devotion to the task in which he saw his life's mission. When in the summer of 1944 Horthy in Hungary did not want to cooperate with the exterminators, Aייכman managed by stealth to push through another death train from Kistarossa to Auschwitz. He even used the cunning stratagem of convening a meeting of the leaders of Budapest Jewry at his headquarters, so that they should be unable at the last moment to do anything and plead with Horthy for the frustration of Aייchman's desires. And when Hitler issued the final order to discontinue the extermination in October 1944, Aייchman still managed to organize the transportation of the Jews.
וכאשר הימלר באוקטובר 1944 הורה סופית להפסיק את ההשמדה. עוד ארגן אייכמן את מצעד היהודים מהונגריה לאוסטריה בדרך ובאופן שיבטיח כי מסע מוות יהיה זה. אחר כך תכנן לבצע הרעלת שארית הפליטה בטרזיינשטט ורצה בהמתתם של היהודים בכל מקום הוא יכול היה להניח כפו עליהם. גם להיטותו לסכל בריחה והצלה של כל יהודי בודד, כאשר אפילו שלטונותיו היו מוכנים לאפשר לו אותו אומלל לפרוץ את רשת המצות, ואנו נוכיח לכם מקרים כאלה לעשרות. מידע עליו כעל יוזם עצמאי, הלהוט להשמיד היהודים עד תום. לא נח ולא שקט עד שלא רדף לתוך תאי הגז כל קיבוץ יהודי, כל פרט, גם כאלה שלפי כל ההוראות שקיבל יכול היה להניחם בחיים. תיאורים כלליים על אייכמן ופועלו עתידים למסור לאחר המלחמה כמה אנשים עמהם שיתף פעולה. על שניים מהם כבר נגזר דין מוות שעה שכתבו דבריהם. האחד, דיטר ויסניצני, ישב בכלא ברטיסלבה who had been Eichmann's superior and later became his subordinate and loyal assistant. The second, Rudolf Hess, commander of Auschwitz, who wrote his diary in Krakow prison on the eve of his execution. Each wrote with complete independence of the other. Both were criminals. Both might have erred in details. But it would seem that their words provide a true picture of the man. And this is what Hess wrote. I quote, Eichmann was absolutely devoted to his mission and was certain that the extermination was necessary in order to save the German people in the future from the destructive intentions of the Jews. That was how he understood his mission, and he devoted all his energies to carrying out the extermination plan of the Reichsführer. Eichmann was sharply opposed to every suggestion to sift out the Jews capable of work from those deported. He regarded this as a constant danger to his plans for the final solution, in view of the possibility of mass escapes or some other event that might permit the Jews to remain alive. Unquote. Mislitseny gave a detailed description of Eichmann's career, his intimate affairs, his methods of dealing with superiors and subordinates. Among other things, he wrote, in 1942 he was opposed to any relaxation, even the very slightest, to endeavor to get Himmler's consent. But at the same time he went to great pains to carry out the deportations in such a way as to frustrate every possibility of a settlement. And in another statement, also from the death cell of the Bratislava prison, Mislitseny wrote, on the basis of my personal experience, I reaffirm that though Eichmann was covered by orders from Hitler and Himmler, his personal share in this act, the decimation of European Jewry, was decisive, and he must be regarded as fully responsible for it, as there were other possible ways of circumventing Hitler's order. Another man, Kurt Becher, who had been appointed by Himmler to carry out the attempted extortion from Hungarian Jewry in the well-known Blood Against Merchandise, the murderous project to which the Nazis gave the name of the final solution of the Jewish problem.
Nazi programs and the methods used to put them into effect varied according to circumstances, and various phases of planning and execution may be distinguished. It was so on the political front. When the German armies had successfully reoccupied the Rhineland, they began to look in the direction of Austria. When they had taken that, they demanded the Sudeten district. When this was conceded, they went on to conquer the whole of Czechoslovakia and invaded Memel. From then onwards, their preparations for war matured rapidly. Whether there existed a political military master plan for the subjugation of peoples and nations, or whether this developed as a result of political victories when the world remained inactive in the faces of brazen Nazi aggression, accompanied by declarations of peace, and Europe's statesmen submitted to threats and fulminations. In any case, Nazi self-confidence and political blackmail grew stronger and more blatant, and the final result was World War II. So it was with the Jews. Whether the physical extermination was planned and prepared from the start, and action waited only on the appropriate time, or whether it came as a gradual development that reached its climax when pretense was no longer needed,
and it had become possible, casting off all restraint, to put into operation the plan for total destruction, it is still possible to distinguish various phases in the treatment of the problem. At the beginning, when the Nazis were still sensitive to the reactions of world opinion, the solution took the form of forced emigration. Though the methods were drastic and brutal, Nazi arrogance had not yet reached the point of deciding on extermination. When they found that it could be done, that for all practical purposes the world was silent, that circumstances were propitious, they went over to total extermination. In between, there was a transitional phase in which the Nazis toyed with the idea of a so-called territorial solution for the Jewish problem. The accused took an active part in both the planning and the execution of all three of these programs. He was the responsible head of the executive arm of all these deadly projects. Though his master, Hitler, did not succeed in realizing a single one of his promises and ultimate aims, Aeychmann carried out whatever he took upon himself to do. But before I speak of his part in the execution, let us dwell first on the plans themselves. First, the Nazis were satisfied with the mass emigration of Jews, seeking refuge from the misfortunes that had suddenly befallen them. The humiliating Nuremberg laws, which dislodged them from their positions economic base, arrest and imprisonment in concentration camps. Nazi greed for gain, which was the only brake on their hatred of the Jews, did not allow them to renounce this source of income. Every immigrant was ordered to pay emigration taxes to the extent of 25% of his income, and to exchange the bonds for frozen marks. Its actual worth rapidly fell to an infinitesimal fraction of their nominal value. This period extended until the annexation of Austria to the Reich on March 12, 1938. 4 days later, the accusers had already put in an appearance in Vienna and begun to organize the anti-Jewish program on the new basis of which I have already spoken. A central authority was set up for the emigration of the Jews, which in actual fact was engaged in their expulsion and the partial confiscation of their property. At the end of October 1938, the German government decided to expel all Jewish residents who had formerly been Polish citizens. The Poles cancelled their passports, but the Nazis decided to take advantage of their position and get rid of them. They were arrested at the order of Reinhard Heydrich, then head of the security police and the SD, whose name will recur in this trial. Thus the first mass Jewish expulsion took place. The Jews were allowed to take with them what they could carry, and were ordered to leave the rest of their property behind. Crowded into freight cars, they were transported to a point near the border, commanded to descend, and then chased through the fields in the direction of the Polish border. Men and women stumbled and fell, but were forced by kicks to rise and run on. Some lay dead where they had fallen.
משמרות הגבול הפולנים שהיו בלתי מוכנים למסע פתע זה נשארו עובדי צור. הזרם פרץ. הגירוש הראשון עלה. בין המגורשים האומללים היה סנדלר יהודי מנדל גרינשפן. אף הוא גורש בחוסר כל עם אשתו וילדיו. בירושה אמר כתבה המשפחה בריאה מפולניה לבנה הרשל שנמצא אז בפריז. נער צעיר זה בן ה-17 החליט כי הוא לא יחשה למראה העוול, ואם העולם כולו מוכן להשלים עם מעשי הפשע שבוצעו לנשים, הוא הרשל גרינשפן
Herschel Grinchman would not be still. He would at least try to avenge the injustice to his parents and family. On the morning of November 7th, he bought a pistol, and that very day showed up at the German embassy in Paris. He had determined to kill the ambassador, and he was sent to the counselor of the legation, Ernst von Rath, who asked him what he wanted. The young man's revolver barked twice, and von Rath fell severely wounded. To the Paris police, Herschel Grinchman declared, I resolved to kill a member of the German embassy as a sign of protest. I had to avenge the Jews to draw the attention of the world to what is happening in Germany. Grinchman did not know then that his sacrifice would be in vain. Not even the despairing act of this young Jew could shock the world. He himself was imprisoned in Paris, and after the invasion fell into German hands. He was in Berlin for special investigation by the accused. He was investigated. No further traces of him have been found. Von Rath died of his wounds after 2 days. Immediately, Heydrich issued emergency instructions to all units of the Gestapo to the effect that following the attack on von Rath, anti-Jewish demonstrations may be expected. This I quote. He therefore ordered the police to cooperate in the organization of the demonstrations, to guide them, and to permit the destruction of Jewish property and the burning of synagogues, so long as it is possible to ensure that the flames would not spread to other neighborhoods. All the property of the Jewish community was to be confiscated. Nazi Germany revived in Europe the burning of the synagogues, which until then had been known only in the darkest days of the Middle Ages. That night of terror between November 9 and 10 came to be known as the Crystal Night. Nazi hooligans broke into Jewish homes, pillaged, destroyed and plundered. Thousands were imprisoned in concentration camps in order to protect them from the wrath of the people. This was the first time the Nazis arrested Jews in large numbers at one time and put them in concentration camps. 101 synagogues were burned and 76 destroyed. 7,500 places of business were plundered. These figures are taken from an official report submitted by Heydrich to Goering at a meeting of ministers devoted to Jewish affairs 2 days later. The minutes of which will be submitted to the court. The damage to shop windows alone came to 6 million marks, and what most bothered the participants in the meeting was the problem of the compensation for damages that the insurance companies would normally have to pay the Jews. It was thereupon decided quite simply that these companies would make their payments to the German treasury, and the Jews would be obligated to repair the damage at their own expenses. Goering complained that a great deal of property had been destroyed. And when Heydrich also reported the deaths of 35 Jews, Goering said, it would be better if you had killed 200 and not destroyed so much property. There was a further exchange of opinions about the compelling of Jews to wear a distinctive badge. Towards the end of the meeting, Goering said, and I quote, I shall find an appropriate formula to obligate the Jews as a whole to pay a fine of 1 billion marks for their base criminal acts, etc., etc. 1 million months. That will hit them where it hurts. The swine won't carry out another murder so quickly. And in general, I must repeat, I wouldn't like to be a Jew in Germany now. Unquote. A fine was imposed, and brutal legislation went into effect to deprive the Jews of all sources of livelihood. Eichmann was in Vienna on the Crystal Nacht, and we shall yet have the opportunity of tracing his actions there at that time. I have referred to this ministerial meeting at such length because it marks a turning point and a phase of preparation for future developments. This had been a second test action of the Nazis against the Jews. If this could be done to them without shocking the world, it would be possible to proceed further towards the final solution. At the same conference, Heydrich reported on the activities of the accused in Vienna and spoke with pride of the fact that thanks to the activities of the Vienna Bureau for Emigration, some 50,000 Jews had already left Austria. It was decided to set up a central authority for Jewish emigration from the entire German Reich. And in January 1939, Göring instructed Heydrich to carry out the plan and to use all possible means to speed up emigration. This immigration by expulsion program was thenceforth carried out in all parts of Germany, and beginning July 1939, also in that part of Czechoslovakia that had meanwhile fallen into the hands of the Germans and was known as the Protectorate. In his order, Göring appointed Heydrich, Chief of the Security Service and Security Police, as head of the Central Office for Emigration, with economist Wohltat as his administrative associate. Thus ensured that while Heydrich would work towards getting the Jews out of Germany, Wohltat, who had formerly been Schacht's assistant, would be concerned with plundering their property.
בדרך זו התגבר גרינג על ההיסוסים שהשמיע בגלוי בהתייעצות המיניסטרים שעה שהעלה נימוקים פיסקליים וכלכליים נגד מדיניות ההגירה הכבדה. מעתה נמצאה הדרך לעשות זאת ללא פגיעה בכלכלה הגרמנית שעל הכוונתה למאמץ מלחמה היה גרינג המעונה. המסחר בחירותו של האדם היהודי היה מעתה למדיניות הרשמית של הרייך. ריבנטרופ הודיע בחוזר של משרד החוץ ב-25 לינואר 1939 כי המטרה האחרונה של מדיניות גרמניה הנאצית היא הגירת כל היהודים וכי הבעיה לא תיפתר עד שאחרון היהודים לא יעזוב אדמתם. ושר הכלכלה פונק יכול היה להודיע אז כי מתוך 7 ביליון מרק שהוא הרכוש של יהודי גרמניה כבר עברו 2 לידי המדינה ויש לקוות כי בקרוב תקבל גרמניה. שניים אלה, הרחקת היהודים באופן פיזי על ידי גירושם או המתתם וגזל רכושם יהוו מעתה מטרות קבע של מדיניות גרמניה הנאצית. הגירוש והגזל תחילה, הרצח והגזל אחר כך. יישארו צמודים זה לזה ומלווים זה את זה בכל גלגולי השואה עד שאין להבחין ביניהם, עד שאין לדעת מה חשוב ממה, ואיזו משתי המטרות משרתת את האחר. שתיהן חלק מהפתרון הסופי, שתיהן עקרונות יסוד במזימתם של הגרמנים לרצוח ולרשת ככה. ובכל גלגולי השואה
At all stages of the Holocaust, in official reports, filled with shocking details of cruel killings by strangulation, burning, hanging, and unimaginable tortures, there will always be found a twin section telling of the plunder of Jewish property.
The pressure on Jews to emigrate was not discontinued after the outbreak of war. The line changed, as has been said, only when new decisions were reached relating to the physical fate of the Jews. But in certain respects the attitude towards the Jews remained ambivalent. They were to be got rid of, but not completely, to be expelled, but a certain number had best be left to serve as a sort of hostage, so that the threat of their destruction might bring pressure on the world's rulers to submit to the German will. Hitler gave expression to this idea in one of his conversations with Rauschning, president of the Danzig Senate. On January 30th, 1939, he delivered his famous speech in the Reichstag, predicting if the Jews controlling international world capital would again bring the nations to a world war, the result would not be the spread of Bolshevism and the subsequent victory of Judaism, but rather the annihilation of European Jewry. Again, Hitler had fused the Jews with his two mortal enemies, the capitalistic West and the communistic East. In both, according to him, the Jews ruled by means of an unholy alliance. The capitalist circles desired the victory of the communists in order to use them as a means by which the Jews could rise to power. The foolish absurdity of this contention is so glaring that there is no sense in even analyzing it. What is important from our present point of view is the fact that the destruction of the Jews was serving Hitler as one of his bargaining and blackmail points in his relations with the outside world. Give in to my demands, or woe to your Jews. All the prophecies of that evil man proved baseless. The Reich that was to have lasted 1,000 years collapsed like a house of cards. The new order that was to have served as the basis for human civilization has become an historical byword for atrocity. The Aryan master race was thoroughly defeated by the degenerate plutocrats and the inferior Slavs. Not only was Germany driven out of the Ukrainian weak granaries she had invaded, which the Führer had promised her as an eternal heritage, but she herself is now divided, and Bismarck's work of unification has been set at naught. Only one single promise, the most dreadful of Germany's terrible deeds, which has brought upon her eternal disgrace, was kept by Adolf Hitler. And for the execution of that promise to destroy European Jewry, he used another Adolf, Adolf Eichman, who is on trial before you today. From the beginnings of the Nazi regime, Jewish affairs were dealt with by the Gestapo and the SS. In June 1940, Heydrich notified Ribbentrop that because of the great increase in the Jewish populations then under the control of the Reich, emigration could no longer be considered a feasible solution of the Jewish problem. He therefore suggested that a territorial solution be sought to settle the Jewish question once and for all, and he wanted to consult him on the matter. Within the framework of programs for expulsion, there also emerged two abortive projects of a territorial nature. One was to deport all the Jews to Madagascar. In fact, this was an old scheme which had already been put forward in the anti-Semitic literature of the 1920s. The Polish government had toyed with it in the 1930s, and the Nazis had begun to discuss it officially even before the outbreak of the war. Goering and Rosenberg made speeches on the proposal in the Reichstag, and the idea was the subject of diplomatic activity and pseudo-scientific researches. In July 1940, the German Foreign Office prepared a memorandum according to which defeated France would have to relinquish Madagascar within the framework of the future peace treaty. A German military base would be erected on the island, and the Jews would be settled there under a German mandatory regime, as a hostage for the future good behavior of their kinsmen in the United States, unquote. The accused too had a hand in all this. One of the staff of his section, his close assistant Danica, to whose name we shall recur, was one of Eichmann's loyal partners in the execution of the Jews, wrote a detailed memorandum for his Foreign Office on the Madagascar plan. Its advantage, he wrote, was that it would isolate the Jews on an island. Its execution should be made possible by the confiscation of Jewish property, and its executors should be the Gestapo. The goal should be to send 1 million Jews each year. There is no need to add that this plan was abortive. To this day, experts differ as to whether the Nazis ever gave it serious thought, or whether it only served them as one of their many means of camouflaging a different project which had already begun to take shape. In any case, practically nothing was done to realize it. On the other hand, an attempt was made at the territorial concentration of Jews within another context, by collecting them into the Lublin zone between the San and the Vistula rivers. This was called the Nisko plan, after the name of the village at the center of that small region to which Eichmann drove Jews from Vienna, Moravia and Bohemia in the winter of 1939. You will hear evidence of the theft of the property of the deportees, how they were left destitute in the zone, the brutal treatment to which they were subjected, the expulsion of a number of them eastwards beyond the Soviet borders with the threat that any attempting to get back would be killed. Eichmann personally dealt with the Nisko expulsions, even spending a number of days in the Nisko area. The project was finally abandoned because of the opposition of the governor of Poland, Hans Frank, who persuaded Goering that the project was upsetting the German war effort. The Nisko refugees later met their deaths in the Belsatz extermination camp.